Hello all, back to a stream of consciousness this week about Picard Season 3 Episode 9, Vox. This is a really good episode that explained a lot, gave pretty much all the answers. I'm not sure it's as good as people are saying it is, but I really enjoyed it. As usual with this series, some really good character work, some really good interpersonal relationships and conversations, some challenges, but there were two particular moments that really annoyed me. I'll come to those in spoilers. There were a few little nostalgia nods, and I have to say at the end of the episode I had a massive beaming smile on my face. I actually thought that I may have figured it out. Turns out I hadn't. I'd got a fraction of it, but not the scope. Anyway, I'm probably going to drift into spoilers, so I may as well start that now. Be warned. The episode started with a bit of a rewind. Like those Republic series back in the old days, we go back on what happened at the end of the last episode and retell it a little bit. It's still the counselling session with Deanna in Jack's head. She asks him about the vines, and he says they remind him of a planet that he went to with his mum. And the vines are all connected in connectivity, obviously leaning again towards the Borg. Deanna goes to open the door, because obviously it looked like Jack opened the door at the end of the last episode. She opens the door and then wakes in the counselling room, runs out and won't tell him what it is, and he's shouting, "What is it?" So again, we get a delay. She runs into Picard and Beverly. They say, "What is it? What is it?" And again, we get a delay. Honestly, it was a bit frustrating. Flashback to Deanna opening the door, looks horrified, and there is a Borg cube. Apparently, the red was a reflection of a planet that Jack was on with his mother. That's the excuse anyway, obviously, it was just to mislead. Picard rushes off to speak to Jack, but is stopped by Deanna, who points out that Jack is a clear and present threat and has to be treated as such, much to the horror of both Beverly and Picard. Picard goes to see Jack in his quarters, and Jack's pulling his hair out because nobody's told him what's going on. Picard, in a roundabout way, tells him that he is Borg, because it turns out that the Irremotic syndrome was a biological form of circuitry that had been left behind when it was de-assimilated, and that passed to Jack. And whilst in Picard it was pretty much dormant, in Jack it's active. There's also a comment about Jack being a transmitter rather than a receiver, which I'm sure will have relevance at a later point. Picard is explaining to Jack that he's Borg and how it happened. And this is quite a nicely played out scene, because Picard seems both equally horrified about what he's done to Jack and guilty, but at the same time repulsed by his son, who represents the people who took everything from him and made him kill his friends. Jack challenges him and says, "You said you'd be there for me and you can't even look at me." Picard says he can go to this particular place where he'll be safe, but Jack knows that's just an institution where he'll be studied and mind-meld lobotomized. So he goes to leave and takes over the two security officers who try and stop him, makes them stop Picard, and he just goes. His mum rushes to try and stop him as well, but the security guards hold him back, and Jack makes his way to a shuttle. He switches off the transponder and he's gone. And his plan is to go and see the Borg, find out what they did to him, confront the Borg Queen and kill her. But the plan goes badly wrong. He finds the cube, or a structure that's cube-like, but it's much vaster. He goes inside, confronts the Borg Queen, with the intention, as I say, of killing her, but he can't, and the tendrils descend, inject him in the back of the neck, and his eyes turn black because he's being assimilated. Meanwhile, on the Enterprise, they've realised that the changeling stole Picard's body to extract the Borg technology, and they implanted it into the transporter systems on every ship. And that DNA, or whatever you want to call it, has been embedded in every single person in the Federation who used a transporter, which explains why Jack saw the tendrils when the crew were transported off the Titan. It's quite a cool and really insidious plan. The Federation have been assimilated slowly without even knowing it. Did not see that coming. They realise they've got to get back to Earth to try and prevent the attack, because Frontier Day is happening. I can't believe I didn't see the parallel with the Borg and what they were doing with their ships, but I'll come into that in a second. Shaw's not keen on the idea of flying into the middle of the Starfleet Armada, but that's all they can do. Just as they arrive, or as they're getting close, Admiral Shelby gives an announcement And I knew that name. I had to look it up. And she first appeared in the episode Best of Both Worlds in The Next Generation. There's a lovely irony here too, because she was brought on board the Enterprise because she was a Borg expert, and she's walked right into this. All of the ships are being linked together to form an armada, to form a group mind, if you like. And it's commented on that they didn't even notice that they were turning their own ships into the Borg. The Titan flies in. As soon as they get in range, the ship's taken over. Communication still works, so Picard sends out a message saying, "It's the Borg, it's the Borg." It gets cut off with the transmission from the Borg themselves. 7 of 9 feels it, but nobody really knows what it is. And then you have this scene where they realise that this gene, this Borg element, is only active in brains that are forming, so younger people. Once people are older, it won't have an effect. And the signal from the Borg is the trigger. And everybody in the entire fleet under the age of, I can't remember if it's 20 or 25, is assimilated almost instantly, including LaForge's 2 daughters, which obviously tears his heart out, but there's nothing he can do. All they can do is run. Even though that's just been explained, Shaw asks what's happening, and again he's told why. I understand he wouldn't know, but as a viewer, that's a bit of unnecessary exposition, going back to that repeating stuff we already know. Shaw, 7 and Picard manage to get off the bridge into a turbo lift. Shaw tells them if we go to maintenance, there's a shuttle and they can get out of there. The remainder of the TNG crew meet them, and then they're ambushed. Shaw takes the front line position, telling everyone to get on board. Everyone else is shooting as well at the assimilated crewmen. Stun only. Everyone gets on board just as Shaw is shot. 7 and Raffi rush to him, and he gives 7 command of the ship. I really didn't like this bit. For a couple of reasons. One's a smallish one and one's a bigger one. Firstly, Worf runs really early on, and that's not Worf. I've really enjoyed this series' portrayal of Worf, and I always remember Michael Dorn saying that every series he played Worf slightly differently. And he's definitely been a different, lighter, comedic Worf. But to see him leave to go into the shuttle before other people just seemed really out of character for him. To the extent that Raffi stays behind, but he goes, and that doesn't make sense to me. Obviously they want the crew back together, so he's got to go, but it seemed like maybe he should have stayed a bit longer. It just felt very silly. And the other one is Shaw dying. I had a feeling he was going to die simply because as soon as I realised it was Borg, I knew there was some payoff to the story that he told about being a survivor. Also a couple of YouTubers, their reaction when people were saying they'd love to see a Shaw series kind of made me think, oh, is he going to die? It's annoying. Even when people don't say stuff, it can give things away. Yeah, he was at the forefront, he was shooting, but it didn't feel like the moment I thought he deserved. His whole thing was about why did I survive? His whole speech, the nub of it was why was I chosen? And I expected a grander moment. I expected more from that death. It felt very much like it was like he was sacrificed on the altar of 7 and Raffi so that they could be elevated, rather than having this moment that he deserved, that it was earned, that felt like that's where it was going. So that bugged me. He also called her 7 of 9 when he was dying. And apart from that being one hell of a mouthful for your last breath, I kind of wish he hadn't. I liked his antagonism towards her, and whilst he was softening towards her, it would have been quite funny, I thought, if he just still called her Hansen. I understand it. I understand that's a moment that's kind of been built in the show. Just part of me wished he hadn't, because it would have still been within character for him to still call her Hansen. The TNG crew leave. Possibly quite predictably, LaForge takes them back to the museum, where he's been rebuilding the Enterprise D, the one whose saucer section crashed in Generations. Obviously this is quite a nice rousing moment to see that ship and to see their faces react to it. They all go on board, and there's a funny little line from Worf where he says he preferred the Enterprise E. And there's another little joke actually before that where someone makes a comment about the Enterprise E and Worf just turns and says, "Wasn't my fault." And there's also something that I quite liked, because I'd heard someone comment on this about how austere the ships looked and how the older ships had carpet, and I hadn't noticed that. I knew the newest ships looked very cold, So there's a nice little moment where Picard mentions that the thing he's missed the most is the carpet, which I thought was quite funny. I mean, this tone of this scene is quite light considering the gravity of what's going on, but it works. It should be a bit jarring, but it really isn't. Possibly because of the nostalgia kick that I'm getting at the time. They all make a commitment to being there with Picard and going through with this. Obviously, this ship isn't webbed into the network. It's analog to their digital. So they all take their seats, which is thrilling to see, obviously, being a fan of TNG. And Picard says engage, and the Enterprise pulls out, and I have a massive smile on my face. And I'm very conscious of how happy that makes me. There are those who would say how sad it is that such little things make geeks happy, but that's all we want. We don't want much. Well-written shows that pay homage to the characters that we love and do them justice, and this is what we're getting with this series. I do wonder where we're going now, because I have a feeling that Jack's going to save the day and we're going to get another kind of Locutus moment, because at the end of the day, what can the Enterprise do against the entire fleet? But it's going to be a fun ride. And this is a series that I am going to rewatch and probably binge at some point. But it's definitely overall been a cracking series. A couple of weaker episodes, but overall, really enjoyed it. Onwards to the final next week. And typically, I've got something on the Saturday. So hopefully my review won't be too late. I will do my best. So I'll be interested to know what you all thought of the episode. Whether the extra elements of the plan were a surprise like they were to me. Or whether you nailed it. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for listening. I always appreciate it. And peace out.